Guys, how do I even start a list like this? There have been so many bad decisions throughout history. Where do I even draw the line? I'm Mike with List 25, and here, in no particular order, are the worst decisions in history. 25. Killing the world's oldest tree. In 1964, grad student Donald Russ Curry made a decision he'd regret forever. While studying bristlecone pines near Wheeler Park in Nevada, Curry struggled to extract a core sample from a particularly stubborn tree. Frustrated and running out of time, he convinced the U.S. Forest Service to cut it down. A week later, after analyzing its rings, Curry made a shocking discovery. The tree, named Prometheus, was over 4,800 years old. Later analysis revealed it was actually 5,100 years old, making it the oldest living tree in the world. 24. Trusting the stars. It's hard to say who benefited the most from Hitler's bad decision to trust a horoscope, but one thing's for certain, it certainly didn't help him win the war. A superstitious man, Hitler consulted several astrologers during his reign, in the process giving British intelligence the perfect opportunity to exploit his beliefs. They hired Louis de Waal, a German Jewish refugee with a flair for the dramatic, to assist them with their psychological warfare. De Waal created fake horoscopes that turned the Nazi astrologers' lucky predictions into warnings of doom. By the time de Waal's department was shut down, his work had added to the paranoia and shaken the confidence of Hitler and his inner circle, all because he couldn't resist trusting the stars. 23. Failure to buy rifles prolonged the Civil War. One of the worst decisions of the American Civil War was putting James Wolfe Ripley in charge of Union weaponry. As Chief of Ordnance, Ripley decided breech-loading rifles were too expensive and stuck to outdated smoothbore models, even though they performed poorly. What truly sealed his reputation, though, was refusing to buy surplus Enfield rifles from Britain. He thought it was unpatriotic to rely on an old enemy, leaving the Confederates to snap them up and use them to crush the Union in early battles. After 2 years of poor decisions, Ripley was finally removed in 1863. 22. Adding lard to rifles. In 1857, the British made one of the most clueless decisions in colonial history. They introduced the Pattern 1853 Enfield rifle to Indian troops, which required soldiers to bite open cartridges greased with animal fat. I mean, it sounds pretty harmless, right? Well, not exactly. You see, the grease came from either pigs or cows, meaning Muslims who considered pigs unclean and Hindus who see cows as sacred were both horrified. This cultural insensitivity pushed tensions over the edge and led to the Sepoy Rebellion, a bloody uprising that raged for over a year. 21. The spy who fell asleep and lost his papers. In 1915, German diplomat Heinrich Albert, who was funding a World War I spy ring in America, made a big mistake. He decided to take a nap while riding the subway in New York. When a sudden stop startled him awake, he rushed off the train, forgetting one very important thing: his briefcase. That briefcase, packed with incriminating documents, was quickly snatched up by Frank Burke, a Secret Service agent tailing him. Albert gave chase, but Burke escaped on a trolley. Instead of confronting Germany, the US leaked the files to the press. The scandal swayed American public opinion closer to joining the war, and the involved diplomats were sent packing. 20. The Dutch not bothering to claim Australia. More than a century before Captain James Cook claimed Australia for Britain in 1770, the Dutch had already been there. Back in 1606, Willem Janssen and his ship the Duifken explored about 200 miles of the Cape York Peninsula's western coast. Other Dutch explorers followed, mapping parts of the western and southern coasts and even naming the place New Holland. But here's the thing: they never bothered to claim it. No settlements, no flags, nothing. So when Cook showed up in 1770, he planted the British flag, and the rest is history. 19. Ignoring the Gatling. When George A. Custer set out for the Battle of the Little Bighorn, he made a fateful decision to leave his newly patented Gatling guns behind. In his mind, the guns were heavy and they would only slow down his march. That decision turned out to be a deadly mistake. Without the firepower to hold off the overwhelming Sioux and Cheyenne forces, the general and over 250 men of the 7th Cavalry were killed in what became known as Custer's Last Stand. 18. A timing error. The Gallipoli campaign in World War I was full of poor choices. but one in particular led to devastating losses: the failure to synchronize watches. During a key operation, Allied naval forces ended their bombardment 7 minutes early. Nobody checked to see if the ground troops were ready, and the Turkish defenders used that time to regroup. When the 600 Australian soldiers charged, they walked straight into Turkish gunfire. More than half were either killed or wounded instantly. The lack of coordination led to massive casualties and eventually forced the Allies to abandon the campaign, leaving the Ottomans with a decisive victory. 17. The Bay of Pigs disaster. Oh boy, that heading alone should be enough. The US decision to support the Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961 was a disaster waiting to happen. The plan? Train and arm 1,400 Cuban exiles to overthrow Fidel Castro. The problem? Almost everything. First, the US assumed the Cuban people would rise up against Castro. Spoiler alert, they didn't. Then they underestimated Castro's forces while overestimating what the exiles could do. And to top it all off, the US limited military support to keep the operation deniable, leaving the exiles outgunned and isolated. The invasion was a humiliating failure. It strengthened Castro's grip on power and embarrassed the US on the global stage. 16. The signing of the Waitangi Treaty. In 1840, more than 500 Maori chiefs made the historic decision to sign the Treaty of Waitangi, a historic agreement with the British Crown. The treaty promised to protect Maori land and rights while allowing British immigration and governance in New Zealand. But there was a major problem. The treaty's Maori translation didn't match the English version. The Maori text implied they would retain territorial control while granting governance to the British. However, the English version demanded a full surrender of authority. This mistranslation has sparked conflict and debate ever since. 15. Marie Antoinette's muddled escape attempt. Marie Antoinette was the queen of questionable choices, but her decision during the infamous Flight to Varennes guaranteed her downfall. Initially, Louis XVI planned on leaving Paris alone, rallying his allies and staging a counter-revolution. But Marie insisted that the whole family, including the children, travel together. Then, instead of a discreet getaway carriage, they opted for a large, luxurious one, complete with all the trappings of royalty. Their slow, aristocratic display drew suspicion, the family was recognized, and the alarm was raised. The revolutionaries stopped the royal family, and their capture was the beginning of the end. 14. Making Hitler a state spy. I would love to leave Hitler out of our content, but the man honestly gave historians so much to work with. After World War I, a disillusioned Adolf Hitler found himself working as an intelligence officer for the German army. His job was to monitor the German Workers' Party, or DAP, a small group suspected of Marxist leanings. But when Hitler attended their meetings, he found himself drawn to their anti-Semitic and ultra-nationalist rhetoric. So, in 1919, he joined the party and quickly rose to prominence. By 1920, he had renamed the group the National Socialist German Workers' Party, better known as the Nazi Party. His fiery speeches attracted thousands of supporters and paved the way for the Nazis to seize power in 1933. And then he just spent the rest of his time throwing his heart out to people. 13. Napoleon's invasion of Russia. Okay, what was Napoleon thinking? Was he bored? Restless? The man had conquered almost all of Europe, racking up victory after victory, and then decided to point his massive army, over 600,000 men, at Mother Russia. As we all know, it didn't go well. The Russians refused to fight head-on, retreating instead and burning everything in their path. By the time Napoleon reached Moscow, he found nothing but smoking ruins. Frustrated with no clear win, he turned his army around. And that's when things went from bad to worse. Russian forces harassed his troops at every turn, supply lines were non-existent, and winter hit hard. By the time his army limped home, less than a third of his soldiers were still alive. 12. The decision that left Stalin helpless. As a dictator obsessed with personal security, Stalin forbade anyone from entering his room without permission, a decision that would come back to haunt him. One day, when Stalin didn't appear for his usual routine, his guards were hesitant to go into his chambers. Entering uninvited could mean execution. but ignoring an actual emergency could cost them their lives too. So, trapped in this impossible dilemma, they decided to wait it out. When someone finally worked up the courage to check, they found Stalin on the floor, helpless after a massive stroke. He died 4 days later. 11. The Habsburg Drunken Brawl. The Austro-Turkish War of 1788 to 1791 gave us one of history's most ridiculous friendly fire incidents, all thanks to wine and poor decisions. On the night of September 21st, Austrian hussars crossed a river to scout for Ottoman troops. However, instead of enemy soldiers, they found wine, and they got drunk. Worried about his men, the commanders sent infantry to find them, and as these things go, the infantry demanded the hussars share their booze, and a fight broke out. A shot was fired, someone yelled, "Turks!" and chaos ensued. Back at the camp, an artillery officer mistook the chaos for an attack and ordered cannon fire. Soldiers woke up and joined the mayhem, firing blindly. 2 days later, the Ottomans arrived to find thousands of casualties and an abandoned camp. 10. Bank of America's dividend payments and stock buybacks. Okay, so moving away from wars to a financial ouchie, or disaster, for a second, in 2014, Bank of America, led by CEO Brian Moynihan, made the costly decision to announce plans to increase its quarterly dividend from 1 cent to 5 cents per share and initiate a $4 billion stock buyback, thinking they had passed the Federal Reserve stress test. The problem? They actually hadn't passed. The bank miscalculated the value of some Merrill Lynch bonds, which led to the premature announcement. When the error was revealed, the fallout was swift and brutal. Shareholders were furious, and the bank's stock lost $9 billion in value in a single day. 9. NASA's $125 million mishap. In 1999, NASA lost the $125 million Mars Climate Orbiter due to a disastrous oversight, conflicting measurement systems. The engineering team at Lockheed Martin used English units, while NASA worked with the metric system. This mismatch wasn't identified during key reviews, and the miscalculation sent the orbiter on a trajectory that caused it to burn up in Mars's atmosphere. Now, obviously, this wasn't just one person's decision, but rather a series of choices to skip double-checking calculations and not enforce standardization that led to this costly mishap. For NASA, it was a painful lesson in how small errors in planning can lead to massive failures. Ouchie. 8. Japan's big mistake. On December 7, 1941, at 7:48 a.m., hundreds of Japanese planes launched a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, sinking battleships and destroying over 300 airplanes. While the attack caused devastating damage, Japan's decision to prioritize the US's battleships over their fuel reserves and repair yards was a massive mistake. To make matters worse, the Pacific Fleet's aircraft carriers, the most important and critical naval assets, were away from the base that day. As a result of Japan's missteps, the US Navy recovered quickly, declared war the next day, and eventually took control of the Pacific. 7. Rommel's decision to celebrate his wife's birthday on D-Day. One of World War II's most significant moments caught Erwin Rommel completely off guard. Tasked with defending the coast of France, Rommel decided to fly to Germany on June 5th to celebrate his wife's birthday. Now, to be fair, weeks of bad weather and enemy inactivity made an invasion seem unlikely. But when D-Day arrived on June 6th, Rommel was nowhere to be found, and the German defenses were left in disarray. By the time he returned, the Allies had a firm grip on the beaches, and the Germans never regained control. 6. Mao's Great Leap Forward. In 1958, Mao Zedong decided to launch the Great Leap Forward. His plan was to transform China's economy by reorganizing agriculture and industry into massive communes. I mean, it sounds great when I say it like that, and I'm sure it looked good on paper. The plan was ambitious and completely unworkable. Farmers were forced to abandon traditional methods for untested practices, and unrealistic quotas meant crops were overreported or wasted. Meanwhile, labor was redirected to backyard steel furnaces that produced little of value. The consequences were catastrophic. In the wake of widespread crop failures and mismanagement, an estimated 15 to 45 million people died from starvation. 5. Russia's decision to sell Alaska to the United States. In 1867, Russia sold Alaska to the US for $7.2 million. At the time, Russia saw Alaska as a liability. The Crimean War exposed how hard it was to defend or supply the remote territory, especially with British and Allied ships controlling the seas. Meanwhile, relations between Russia and the US were strong, so selling Alaska seemed like a mutually beneficial move. But Russia underestimated the land's value. By the 1880s, gold mining had begun, and America reaped hundreds of millions of dollars in wealth. Today, Alaska produces more gold than any US state, except for Nevada. 4. The sinking of the RMS Titanic. When the RMS Titanic sank in 1912, over 1,500 people died, making it one of the deadliest maritime disasters of all time. But the real tragedy is that it didn't have to be that way. The Titanic's designers made a series of fatal decisions. When the ship was originally designed to hold 32 lifeboats, only 20 were included, enough for just 1,178 of the more than 2,200 people on board. There was also the bulkhead design flaw. The compartments weren't fully sealed at the top, so as one filled up, it spilled over into the next, accelerating the sinking. Adding to the disaster, Captain Smith decided to speed up the ship's arrival date. When the iceberg struck, the limited lifeboats in freezing waters left little chance for survival. 2,200 on board, and they all want messages delivered. If you can tell me where that is from, whew, that's a deep cut. 3. The Chernobyl Disaster. The Chernobyl disaster didn't just happen, it was practically invited. On April 26, 1986, during a late-night safety test, the plant's operators decided to disable their critical safety systems to simulate a power failure. Smart, right? If that wasn't bad enough, they ignored protocols and ran the reactor at dangerously low power, something even the checklist warned them against. Oh, and let's not forget the reactor's design flaws, which made it as stable as a house of cards in a hurricane. The result? A massive explosion, a raging fire, and radiation exposure that affected millions. 2. Hitler's decision to invade Russia. Oh, Hitler. I promise this is the last time he features on today's list. I mean, don't despots ever learn? I mean, just look at number 13. Swap Napoleon for Hitler, Russia for the Soviet Union, and La Grande Armée for the Wehrmacht, and you have the gist of this story. On June 22, 1941, Hitler decided to launch Operation Barbarossa, the disastrous invasion of the Soviet Union. Like Napoleon, he underestimated the brutal Russian winter and Soviet resistance. By November, the Wehrmacht had lost 750,000 troops, and his quick victory was a pipe dream. To make it worse, the invasion pushed Stalin to join the Allies. If Hitler had taken the time to learn from Napoleon's disaster, he might have avoided this colossal mistake, but as we all know, history has a way of repeating itself. But I'm glad he failed. I want to throw that out there. Not saying he should have done it. Just want to be clear on that. Glad he made all these mistakes. 1. The wrong turn that started World War I. On June 28, 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria and his wife Sophie ignored warnings about terrorist threats in Sarajevo. What made their actions truly baffling is earlier that day, they survived a bomb thrown at their car. You'd think that would be a sign to call it a day, right? But no, they decided to visit the injured at the hospital. The problem? The driver didn't get the memo about the route change. While trying to fix his mistake, he turned down a side street, right where their assassin Gavrilo Princip was waiting. Princip didn't hesitate and fatally shot them both. That decision didn't just end their lives. It triggered World War I, killing 18 million people and changing history forever. And that's a wrap. I just know you guys are buzzing to add more items to this list, so which ones did I miss? Let me know in the comments. Also, before you go, let's do another quick trivia question to see if you've been paying attention. Which rifle cartridges sparked the Sepoy Rebellion due to their use of animal fat grease? A. Springfield Model 1861, B. Pattern 1853 Enfield, C. Martini Henry Rifle, or D. Brown Bess? Drop your answer below and let me know if you got it right. And if today's list left you wanting more, why not check out a related video, 25 Lies You Were Told by History Books. I set the record straight on some things you were taught in school that you will not believe. Trust me, it's a good one. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, share, comment, subscribe, click that notification bell so you don't miss out on any new content, and I will catch you next time. Peace.